patient, and hopefully you will get a legislation quite soon. We are supposed to have two presenters during this first working session. I understand that Mr. Noah is not yet in the room. He was probably expecting us to start at 11. Nonetheless, I think many of us heard him yesterday when he gave a rousing keynote speech, which I think has the same topic as what he's supposed to speak on this morning. So perhaps we'll just go on with our presenter who is here right now. His name is Henry Minor. He's director of the East Africa office of Article 19, the Global Campaign for Freedom of Expression. He's a friend and brother, and he can normally go on endlessly, so I would have to set some rules. I think we'll give him about 15 to 20 minutes to make his presentation, and then we'll have some time to take some questions, comments, and discussions. Mr. Minor will be speaking to the topic, Access to Information, a Policy Framework for Africa, and I think we'll all be very well enlightened by his presentation. May I now invite Mr. Minor to make his presentation for between 15 and 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edith. Ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Edith being an elder brother, he always, even when we are told we have too much time, he begins by forewarning me. So I will do exactly what he wants for the sake of keeping my peace as a younger brother. I want to start from where I think Commissioner Pansi Tlakula has left, that the landscape in Africa is fast changing, and Namibia cannot be left behind. I think we need to state that again and again, that 2 years ago there were only 5 countries with access to information laws, but now there are 10. A few years ago again, amongst the 43 main treaties, conventions, protocols, charters that the African Union and its bodies have passed, they've had 7 conventions that have clear provisions on right to information. Critical amongst these are those that Namibia has already signed on to, meaning that there's been sufficient reflection on some of these issues. When you notice that Namibia has signed on some of the documents, that begins to tell us that that there's been sufficient reflection on a number of these issues. And I also want to reiterate what Madam Tlakula has pointed out, that there are over 20 draft laws on the continent, not just those few that she mentioned. A number of them are being reviewed quite fast. And we just need to ask ourselves, given the resolution of the cabinet in 1998 on public service and dealing with corruption in Namibia, how well are we beginning to show progress? I think I like the understanding that we must be patient, but patience can only be exercised if there is due recognition that there is movement. Next. So what we need to be asking ourselves is not perhaps when will the law be passed, but what steps are we making? What steps are we making towards moving the process? Just move to the next slide, please. So we need to be able to totally agree on those and see what is the best way. But in terms of reminding ourselves, what are the legal obligations Namibia has? And I pointed out that there are a number of instruments on the continent which Namibia has voluntarily ratified. And then I think it did this after due reflection. One of those is the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And Article 9.1 clearly spells out that every individual has a right to receive, seek, receive, and impart information. Article 45 of that charter clearly spells out the need for Namibia to comply. And therefore, we need to ask ourselves, from 1992, 30th July, when Namibia ratified the African Charter, what steps has it taken to ensure fuller realization of Article 9.1? So I think that's the question we need to be asking. Patient as we may, 1992 to date, what actions has Namibia taken towards ensuring that? Of course, to Pansy and others, you submit your reports showing progress over the years. And then this can be done if you have a comprehensive law that begins to show steps. I think the law is not an absolute, that when you pass it, everything will be okay. It means that's why laws are reviewed. You pass laws and they are implemented, and where you have challenges, you review. So let's move to the next slide, please. The second document that, again, I know that Namibia participated in thinking through is the Declaration of Principles on Freedom of Expression. And it clearly spells out what is expected of member states. And in Principle 4, it elaborates on how can we begin to think through that process. And one thing that is very clear is that public bodies hold information not for themselves, but as custodians. So if the permanent secretary is an employee of Namibians, and the employers say they want the information, can he continue to keep the information infinitum, saying, you need to be patient and make me understand why I've been holding your information? I think another reason could come into this to help us move the process forward. And that within the principles, I think 5 principles, RTI is guaranteed, must be guaranteed in law. So there are already some practices that are positive in Namibia that we need to identify with and begin to know that we are already taking positive steps towards that. What we just need is to put up an administrative structure that would help manage what we are doing. Next slide, please. I think Commissioner talked about the issues of the resolutions, and I would not want to really repeat that, but clearly to know that the African Union and its bodies have put some premium on this right, and they understand its instrumentality and leverage for development on the continent. And that's why they created this special mandate. You would also see that from 2004, when the special mandate was created, they've had 4 other clear resolutions in relation to RTI. I may not repeat those ones. Just move to the next slide. And I want to point out that also when you're thinking about this, do not think about right to information as a standalone law that what Pansy calls the usual suspects advocate for. It has implications on people who do work on women's rights. And the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the right of women in Africa, which Namibia ratified in 2004, clearly underscores the importance of RTI in realization of women's rights. So what can we begin to do if for sure we say we are committed into fuller realization of women's rights on the continent? And Namibia is part of the countries that signed nearly 80 years ago to this protocol. What are we doing to move towards that direction? The next slide is about the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption. Again, I appreciate the Permanent Secretary's speech, which clearly spelled out that Namibia has been doing some work towards combating corruption. And you've shown that by ratifying this law also 80 years ago. And Article 9 of that convention requires states to adopt legislative and other means to give effect to right to access to information, and that this is critical in fighting corruption. So even if the government is only interested in fighting corruption, then there would be sufficient reason to have a law that helps you to get to that point. The other sectoral intervention is about the African Youth Charter. And the African Youth Charter recognizes the lack of access to information as a driving factor in the marginalization of African youth from mainstream society. 7 provisions are of importance to RTI. You're talking about participation, you're talking about employment, you're talking about health, you're talking about youth and culture. And appreciated again, you would see an elaboration of this in the SADC Culture and Youth Charter, which again from the Permanent Secretary's speech was clearly an area where Namibia has indicated it wants to walk the talk. So for me, up to there you begin to be very clear that Namibia has at an international stage, more so at the African level, shown commitment towards enacting an RTI law. By signing to these conventions and charters, you've already begun the discussion. And I believe, apart from the cabinet discussing, every time each of these charters is signed to, you debate and begin to see how it can leverage the governance process of the country. The latest is the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. I think Pansy talked to this more. It is a necessary document, again reflecting on the national anthem. It is a clear indicator that for us to safeguard our freedom, we will be allowed to participate. We will be allowed to be part of the process. We will not be secluded. Namibia signed on this on 10th May 2007, but it has not ratified. By signing, it just showed the willingness to be part of it, but it hasn't fully committed that it would play the game as that charter requires. There is also a charter on statistics, which is another necessary charter that we need to think about. And this charter helps countries to do census, to do demographic household surveys that help in planning for development. This charter was adopted in 2009, but is not yet in force because only 5 countries have ratified it. For it to come into force, we need 10 more signatures. Namibia is not part of the countries that have signed. It has only been signed by Niger, Mauritius, Mozambique, Malawi, and Mali. What does that tell us? Are we planning our development? If for sure we are planning and we have these statistics, what makes it hard for us to sign on such a law and make data available so that people who are planning for provinces, people who are planning for municipalities are able to know how many people they are dealing with, what facilities do they require, and how we may move forward. The last of those charters is the Charter on Values and Principles of Public Service and Administration, an issue that I know again Namibia has already done some work on and said you need proper public service. This charter is also not yet in force. It's been signed on by 20 states, but ratified by only 2 states, Kenya and Mauritius. But it establishes 2 principles. One is institutionalizing a culture of accountability, transparency, and integrity, which the PS talked to quite well. But it also thinks about the issue of efficient, effective, and responsible use of resources. How do we know that you are using resources responsibly? Through its Article 6, it necessitates states to pass a law on access to information. So I would go to the next slide. I would want to say that to the ongoing discussions, I think African leaders have pointed out, oh, you are telling us laws about UK, Sweden, and the like. Their context is very different from ours. many organizations came up last year and developed what is now called the API Declaration. And that very brief document clearly shows how intertwined the relationship between RTI and other rights, especially socioeconomic rights, are. And it would be a good document for the government of Namibia to look at, so that if you're thinking about children, if you're thinking about women, if you're thinking about people with disability, it helps you to begin creating a connection. And you can begin to see which of those sectors you want to immediately begin working with on the issue of RTI, and which ones do you need to suspend because the administrative structures are not yet fully put into place. I shudder to think that there would be one day when the whole system is ready to go, because that would never happen. We will all be dead. So what you need to do is to ensure that you begin some progressive working with given sectors, test how well it is working, and move to the others. That declaration also proposed to the world the observation of September 28th as a world right to information day. This is being moved, and we would be happy for the government of Namibia to move a resolution to the UNESCO General Assembly that you want that day observed because you are willing to be part of the international community. So quickly and lastly, on the issue of what principles do we derive from all these documents that I've been highlighting. I think 6 key principles need to inform any policy intervention. One is that from all these instruments, states are under obligation to enact comprehensive RTI laws. States are required to pass a comprehensive RTI law. So that is one clear principle that we must work with. And 2, that everyone has the right to information held by public bodies. So most of that information must be made public. We're not saying all. Most of that information must be made public, and that is retained must be subjected to limited exemptions which can stand scrutiny of international human rights law, which Namibia has signed to. 3, that everyone has a right to information held by private bodies which is necessary for them to exercise or protect their rights. So this is not just about governments. It's also about private bodies. It's about companies operating in Namibia. If citizens want to protect their rights and feel that information you are holding is necessary for that, then the private bodies are under obligation to provide such information. 4, that where there is such refusal to disclose information, that shall be subject to an appeal of an independent body or a court of law. So the government cannot be everything, that I will seek information, you will deny, and you will also give me reasons why you've denied. Allow somebody else to adjudicate over that process and tell me for sure it is because of national security that this information has not been availed, or for sure it is because of international relations and that's why this information has not been availed. And public bodies shall be required, even in the absence of a request, actively to publish important information of significant public interest. And lastly, that there is need for us to protect whistleblowers, because if we are to fight corruption, enhance public service, there are people who must point out when the system is not working. Thank you very much, and asante sana.
Thank you very much, Henry. Sorry if I rushed you to abridge your presentation. But I think Henry has established very clearly that Namibia has a duty under international law to enact a right to information legislation. And I think he's put it quite diplomatically that Namibia is not yet meeting that obligation that it has under international law. I think for many of us that may be a bit of a disappointment, because Namibia is the birthplace of the Windhoek Declaration, which has inspired a lot of issues related to what we're talking about. And more than 21 years after the Windhoek Declaration, we would have loved to see Namibia continuing to play that leadership role. It clearly cannot be allowed to lag behind. So we're going to be pushing from within and without for Namibia to move forward again in this process. But we'll open up the floor for discussions of the issues. Where it is required, I think Henry would be quite willing to elaborate on some of the instruments that he's referred to, mainly from around the continent. So nobody can say that this is a Western concept or notion that Namibia is being pushed onto. It's very much African. So the floor is open. I would encourage anyone who has an intervention to briefly introduce themselves, since we didn't have a general introduction. And then if you can keep your intervention brief so we can take as many people as possible. So kindly indicate if you would like to ask a question or make a comment. Are we too hungry? Okay. Maybe we should use this. Okay, it's not detachable.
You here? Can it reach? Good morning. Oh, sorry. I didn't know it has Ngamanen's volume. Good morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Henry Maina, for your eloquent presentation. I would like to assure the participants that the Namibian government does not need much to express itself